Imagine having the confidence to boldly navigate the unknown in your business. Well, my friends, you are in luck because today's guest, Michelle Bomberger, empowers entrepreneurs to do just that. As the founder and CEO of Equinox Business Law Group, she blends entrepreneurial wisdom with legal expertise to help businesses thrive. So, welcome to the show and enjoy my conversation with Michelle. All right, PowHERhouse fam, we have Michelle here, and this is going to be a very valuable chat, especially for those of you who may feel like you are in the grind or struggling because you aren't sure how to manage that thing you're growing called a business and being a mom. So, Michelle, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Nicole.
My pleasure. I'm just looking forward to what you have to share. So, and before we get into maybe some of the questions, I would love for you to just explain to everyone how you came about in starting your law firm. And if you can, also share a little bit about what's unique about it. Because what I find with a lot of our clients, especially our business coaching clients, is that every single one of them need legal guidance and advice. And their first course of action is Google. Now it's AI. And we both know that AI is always going to give you an answer. Whether or not it's right, nobody knows. But it most definitely doesn't provide and offer the protection that an attorney does. But a lot of the fear is, well, I don't know what to ask for, who to go to. That's not going to charge me $2,500 for a consultation. And I'm just a small business getting started. Is an attorney even going to be able to help me or want to work with me? So,
yeah, great question.
Yeah.
It's a lot to unpack there.
It sure is. Yeah.
As far as getting started, so I actually, moved into the Seattle area after grad school. I did my MBA and my law degree together. So I did the long version of the MBA program. And was going to take a job with a law firm during the .com boom, which then disappeared. Job went away. I tell my children that, it's not a straight line journey. It will throw you some curveballs, and you might as well just sort of prepare for that. But when I finally started Equinox, it was a few years after I graduated from law school. I hadn't ever really practiced law, but had this idea of how law firms could serve businesses better. And just some of the things that you just talked about were, people don't call because they have concerns about costs, certainly. They have concerns about complexity because lawyers just make it so complicated. Responsiveness, the number of times people have shared with us that they just never heard back. And the no factor, right? The constant well, you can't do that, you can't do that. So all of these things inhibit people from calling. And so when I was thinking about where do we fit in the marketplace, it is how do we solve those issues? And the answer is being business focused, taking the ticking clock off the table, being incredibly responsive, and being just really pragmatic and relationship focused. So most people, as they grow their business, they have a lawyer, but they don't have a relationship with a lawyer. They don't have someone who knows what they did yesterday and what they want to do tomorrow. And that, I think, is a unique space where big companies have a general counsel. Small companies don't. The general counsel's job is to quarterback everything, looking at risk, looking at opportunity, looking at how do we get from point A to point B? And if we're only using legal transactionally, meaning I have a fire that needs to be fought or I have this small thing that needs to be done, you're not getting the real value. The real value comes from that strategic counsel to make sure that when the fire happens, you are ready already. You have everything in place and you can confidently say, we got this. It's not a fire drill. It's something that we just need to kind of figure out how to manage.
Yeah, I love that. And I love how you said to just being able to have advice that is in plain English, right? Because so often too, we see all of these contracts and questions are like, I have this, I have no idea what it means. Like, am I, and because of that, they really don't know if they're protected in a way that they want to be in law and legal contracts. I find it's twofold. It's one, we just don't know what we don't know, right? I have learned, of course, some ways the hard way, that we typically don't think we need an attorney until something already happened, right? And then we're like, oh shit, maybe I should protect myself moving forward. And then The other side to that is really just not knowing or understanding what we do have, and not I think I'm not sure if it's the right questions to ask or formulate to make sure that we're articulating it. And I think and part of that, and not knowing the questions to ask per se, and then not getting adequate guidance, is because, to the point you made about the relationship. And so because we also work with our clients on a super intimate level, especially our financial planning clients, and a lot of times we'll see things, and mostly on the tax side, right? And because the CPA is just checking a box in and out, and there's not that relationship, stuff gets missed. And then, of course, it can happen on the legal side. And so I love that you highlighted that the relationship is important. It's not just a transaction, because when you have a growing small business, every single day, something is changing and growing and morphing. And especially in growth mode, your business 12 months from now can look like 180 degrees different. And therefore, your protection needs to change. Maybe your contracts or how you're doing business. And so, and again, I think, and maybe Michelle, you can talk to this a little bit, is like, we forget that it's also not a one and done, where if you put stuff in place to protect yourself, and it's been a few years, it's probably time to also review and make sure it's still adequate for how your business has changed. And that's something that I also find, hey, it's a review thing, just like anything else.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned the one and done. I actually heard that from somebody last week, which is really, really funny that you brought that up. Because the way that we structure our relationship with clients is a general counsel. It's a fixed price, all inclusive. And so we say, we're going to do this scope of work. And in addition, if anything else pops up during this contract period, we'll tackle that too. So, hey, I got this nasty letter, or this employee said this, or all of that sort of built in. So it really encourages folks to call and ask the question, rather than wondering, well, can I figure it out on Google, as you mentioned? But I was talking to this prospective client, and they said, but these are one and done. So what is the rest of all this stuff? And I said, well, think about your contracts. Once we get that in place, someone's going to push back on a provision. There's going to be some negotiation, or maybe you're going to get a contract from somebody else that you need to look at. So it's not one and done in that, like, you draft it once and it's all fixed and all done, but rather there's always going to be morphing of it. And then understanding what your business needs specifically. So one of the things we do with a lot of clients is contract training, to say, here's your standard. And your standard is this level of risk tolerance. And every entrepreneur, as you know, has a different level of risk tolerance. We have clients that will sign anything and clients that won't sign anything, and everything in between. But if you understand kind of what it means to you, then when someone pushes back, you know what it means to negotiate that pushback. And so there's some ongoing conversation, even beyond the employment laws change every year. So you should be looking at that every year. But it's sort of that ongoing, hey, what about this? Hey, what about that? And someone who knows you, knows your risk tolerance, knows how you operate, can more quickly and inexpensively provide that guidance.
Yeah. And, just I'm curious, like, what are some of the big holes that you see when you're first meeting with small business, that if there's anything that you're like, yep, these are the top 3 things that we see all the time, what would those be?
Yeah, I think employment is probably the biggest, because it is the most black and white, legal versus illegal, than other areas of business law, which tend to be, more the relationship between the parties. And so employment is huge, especially as we came out of COVID and people were hiring anywhere and everywhere, not realizing the complexity of doing so. So there's a lot of work kind of happening to make sure that folks are up to date and compliant in that area. I would say contracts and governance are the next 2. So contracts are a huge part of doing business, right? I mean, you've got relationships, with your online customers, so you have privacy policy, terms of use, you have your, regular customers, you have your vendors, you have consultants, all of these are contracts. You have your lease if you have one. So software licenses, it goes on and on when you think about the number of contracts that you have. And even though you're going to sign that, software contract regardless, do you know what it says? And that is a really important piece of understanding what it says, so that at least you know what you're getting yourself into. And then when I say governance, that is, ownership relationships, legal compliance. So the idea of keeping the corporate veil in place. You're probably familiar with that from a tax compliance standpoint as well. And then succession planning, like what happens to the company if something happens to you? And as the company grows, that becomes a bigger and bigger question. Do we have the people in place to take over if something happens and you can't show up to work tomorrow? So that's the third area. We also kind of find opportunities with IP, so get registering trademarks, things like that, which build assets for the business, and then sometimes real estate and other kind of ancillary things. But as a general counsel, anything that the business sees is something that we're going to tackle first, and then every now and again, we'll bring in an outside professional to kind of support as needed.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's just helpful to hear. And I always say, especially like don't do business without getting something in writing signed. Like no handshake bullshit, kids. So even if you love each other, even if it's family, you know the deal. Money changes everything. And I've seen it all. Well, I'm sure I've not seen it all yet, but I've seen some crazy stuff. And like, all this stuff that we assume won't happen, I can promise you it's possible. So
on that note, I'm going to add one more thing, because you mentioned AI earlier. And I think it's a really important thing to kind of just bring up, is because we have this technology now and it's like magic. I can have a contract, magic. But again, it only knows what you can tell it, right? It can only give you the details for what you can describe to. And if you don't know what to describe, then you're still stuck with something that may or may not work. And so I've talked even for years, when we've had LegalZoom, we've had, these other tools out there, the way I would sort of distinguish is the transaction versus the counsel, right? Mm-hmm. So are you looking for just a transaction? Are you looking for a document that you're going to sign? Sure. But the piece that's the more valuable piece is understanding what it says and whether it does the most that it can do. So it might be compliant. I've heard, that some of the LegalZoom stuff is iffy, but generally speaking, that's been looked at by lawyers. ChatGPT, on the other hand, is not, right? So you don't know where it might have gaps. So even if you're starting there, the counsel that you get around what are you looking for in that contract, what should it do, is a really important add-on.
Yeah, I agree. And that is kind of the terrifying thing about AI. And we on our end too, with financial planning clients or investments, now people are going to it, and AI can't be wrong. So they're always going to give you an answer, even if it's not based on any kind of research data or adequate information. And so that number one is important to hear. But another thing too, actually, that we've been talking about quite a lot is thinking about, now that AI is here, we're all using it. And hopefully we are encouraging our team to use it to be more efficient. But thinking about how you want to now incorporate policies around use of AI in the workplace, right? And how you want to articulate that to your team and what that looks like too is probably a good thing, where if you have your handbook or typical SOPs for your team, this may be a great time to revamp, because it is here, and you definitely want to be proactive before you're probably in some potential hot water, right?
Absolutely. And that's something that I remember hearing in one of the first AI programs that I went to, and that is, your people are doing this. You need to put some parameters around how they do it. It's not, saying something like, don't use this is not a practical solution. But also leaving the free-for-all is also not a practical solution. And, the obvious one is confidentiality. And I think people generally have gotten that message, but maybe not everybody, that you never put any confidential information into these tools unless you are confident that it's not shared. And even then, I would be careful. But we're trying to use it for marketing, for, brand voice. We're using it for document generation. We're using it in a lot of different areas. We're using it for, transcripting. And that was a huge one. Because when you're talking about highly sensitive things, are you really confident that that information is not going outside of your own protected domain? So putting the balance of, please, make yourself more efficient, do your job better, and here are the guidelines to do so.
Yeah. No, I thought it was, it's just the topic right now, and we're so excited about what it can do, but we don't always look about how to CYA, right? And so I just wanted to bring that up, because it's certainly been something top of my mind, as we're also trying to leverage it as much as possible to be relevant. So, and not to pivot too much here, but that's the point of the show. I would love to hear, and when we had talked initially and going over your story and things that you went through and the evolution, rather, I think is probably a better English word for that. I promise it's not my second language. of your law practice, right? From where you started and when you started, you were pregnant, had a 1-year-old. Yes. So, ladies, Michelle's crushing it. No excuses. But talk to me about an aha moment that you had when you realized it was time for a pivot.
Pivot to the firm?
Yes. Yes. So I think just to maybe refresh memory, actually. So we were talking quite a lot about building an intentional culture and making sure that you're finding the right butts and the right seats and really thinking about growth because, and again, as a small business, growth can be number one, the only way to survive and not work yourself to death. But second, is terrifying, right? Because you feel like you live, eat, and sleep the excellence of your brand. And to add someone to that who could potentially fuck it up, or the cost of labor is extraordinary. Especially nowadays in America. So that is really more so what I'm talking about and some of the things that you did that I thought were super cool and helpful for others to hear.
Yeah. Well, as I'm sure everybody, that comes on your show says it's a journey, right? It is absolutely a journey. And interestingly, so we operate the company on EOS, the Entrepreneur Operating System. And we kind of doubled down this year to really put the discipline into make it work. We've done it sort of half-heartedly, I would say, for the last few years. And in our last planning session, we were talking about vision, and someone said, your vision. And I was like, but it's not my vision. Like, it's the company, right? It's a company. They're like, no, it's your vision. I'm like, but if it's only my vision, then how do people come on board? Like, we had this whole conversation that was so enlightening to me, almost 20 years into this, that, it is about me. And I don't really want it to be about me in that same way, but literally there's no way to change that. And so then the question is, how do you bring people along? How do people buy into it? How do you communicate it? And I think, some of my struggle has been this we thing that I want to do. I tend to be in the, engaging, galvanizing, bringing people along kind of space. And so everything is a we rather than I want. And that's something that I'm working on, is the asking for, what do you want us to do? Because we'll do it. We're all bought in. You got to give us guidance. And over the years, I have not been particularly good at being direct and building the systems that the company needs in order to be successful. And so when I'm wishy-washy, that trickles down all the way through the company. People don't really know what their accountabilities are. They don't really know what I want. And that's been a struggle. And I go back to I hired my first employees in about a year in. So it'd been about 2006, 2007. And we kind of stuck around, 8-ish people. We've been about 8-ish people for the last 5 or 6 years, and had some attrition, had some new people come on. And I really do attribute a lot of the attrition, sadly, to my inability to provide that growth and structure and career path and real clear direction for folks.
Yes.
I think people came on board, really bought into what we're doing, because what we're doing is incredibly innovative. It's different. And I think people are really inspired by that. But, you talk about how people leave companies because of bad managers. I mean, I have to take responsibility for a lot of that, because I think I wanted people to kind of drive their own path rather than giving them that path.
Yeah. I think sometimes we forget the actual core role of a CEO or a founder, right? And it's that vision in clarity, and then giving our team who we hire, that is brilliant, the gift of strategy and clarity so they can run with it. And, it's definitely something that I have also needed to learn quite a lot. And I think taking extreme ownership too of the areas of which I was not doing well in. And it was a really hard pill to swallow when I had to recognize, like, holy shit, I am not really thinking about what motivates my team. I know what motivates me, but not what drives them. Like, what are the things that they're passionate about? What lights them up? What inspires them? And how can I kind of get them on this ship? And then making sure, of course, that I've got the right butts in the right seats, and starting to ask, like, hey, what are your strengths? Like, what is your zone of genius? Like, this is what we hired you for, but are we misusing your talents? Right. And thinking about that too. And it just was such a a different shift in mindset for me to start leading versus that whole managing, right? Like just do your job. We have so much to do and my ass is always on fire, like, that kind of thing. And it is something that sadly, when you start your business, like they don't teach you this stuff. It's like, you kind of have to navigate it, fail, have some employees, hopefully not leave, but be honest with you. And that doesn't always happen, of course. And I had the great gift of Sarah, my COO, being honest with me. And, hopefully she's like in it till death do us part at this point, but she didn't have to do that, right? She could have just said, well, this isn't for me. See you later. And, and that in itself is a good gift, but then being able to receive the feedback too is hard. And I'm sure, and I don't know if you want to talk about that at all, but it's, it's one thing to hear it, but then taking ownership of like, okay, well, shit, now what?
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's the assumption that people are like me, right? Mm-hmm. That, I was actually really good at saying, take this, run with it, learn from it, call me if you have any questions, right? People need more than that. And as the company grows, they really do need processes and structures. And that's not me. That is totally not me. Yeah. And so having that COO, having that person who, one, slows us down as the CEOs, the founders, the visionaries, someone who slows us down a little bit and says, okay, that's great. We can do that after. Yeah. Put these things in place and roll this out properly. Because I'm just rolling stuff out left, right, and center. And it needs some structure, some change management, all these things. And so slow it down. Having that person who is really, really good at process and systems and having a mechanism for feedback, I think that's actually a really, really important one as well. And maybe we as women are a little bit better at receiving kind of, building those connections and receiving feedback that way. But it is an important part of the process to not be super defensive. I know when we went then full board with EOS and, I started sitting in the sales and marketing role and the visionary role, and I'm not in operations. I'm not in client service. I'm not in all these different areas. And it was kind of hard sometimes not to take things personally and not to be defensive about the way people said things about the status quo, because the status quo I have to take responsibility for. Okay. So that is, I think, a really, really great observation is like, how do you build those systems for feedback so you don't take it personally and you just work together to build?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I was actually just having a conversation with somebody earlier today. It's like, the worst feeling as a owner is to be the last to know. Right. And so you definitely want to think about that. And just for everybody listening to, Traction is a really good book. If you want to pick that up, listen to it, read it, I encourage you to definitely get the physical copy, even if you listen to it first. But it's a great way to get the overview of EOS or starting to use that as a system to grow your business or scale it. And what we're also talking about and what they typically call a COO is like an integrator. So as a CEO or founder, and oftentimes that's the same person, we are all over the place. We have this vision and all these crazy ideas, and we just want to keep implementing new ideas, but we're not very good at like organizing, compartmentalizing, and putting a strategy to like make those ideas happen. And that's what that COO or integrator type person does, is they are able to, in some degree, understand your brain and then make sure that there's a process in place so that all of the things that you have ideas about are actually put into some sort of, depending on your business, system, process, implementation, and then they're delegating that out, educating and training the team, because a lot of us, and Michelle, I don't know if you're like this. I know I've been like the worst teacher ever. Like I just make a lot of assumptions. I don't have any patience, like just figure it out, right? That's not good. And so I've hired people smarter than me in that area who are fabulous educators and trainers and able to do that. And I think our biggest strength can be knowing exactly what we shouldn't be touching, right? Like,
exactly.
Yeah. It's like, stick to what we know and like let our team do the rest, because we have a tendency of messing it up, right? Yeah. So that again was like another aha moment in my world that, I don't know about you, but it's like I'm better off if I don't touch some things, right? And they are certainly happier for it too, because save them a lot of time by not bottlenecking all the things that they already worked out. So,
But I've always been surprised at,
yeah,
how people perceive me, right? I think we show up as leaders of our companies. We are peers of everybody else. We are just there to kind of help and pull people together. But that's not how we're necessarily seen by our team, right? If I say, hey, maybe we should think about this, people are jumping on it and running with it. And I'm just saying it casually as some idea that came to my head yesterday as I was listening to a podcast, right? And so just acknowledging that we do have a voice that is very different in the company, and people listen to that voice and they hear something maybe different than we intend. And I am definitely the queen of, ideas. And when I say it to the wrong person, who is excited about it also and starts running with it, it does mess things up. And so, the channels of communication that EOS has created, but you can create through other mechanisms as well, have been really valuable because it's thoughtful around who needs to know what when. And that's not about limiting people, but it's about controlling a message and creating the systems needed to execute on it well.
You know what? That's a really good point that you bring up, actually, because there have been so many times where I've had an idea I was excited about, most definitely didn't think it through, but said it out loud to the team. And there's 7 of us. I'm talking to everybody all the time about all the things. And, and what I didn't realize, of course, was the fact that I was overwhelming the crap out of them. And they were having a ton of anxiety about oh my God, now we have to do this. And how are we going to do that? And it was just a in the moment idea that I hadn't thought about whether or not I even liked it. And then, and to your point, they were thinking about, okay, we're going to have to execute on this. What does it look like? And so I was really creating quite a bit of chaos, unintentionally, of course. And so, but I get excited and I feel like I need to get it out as soon as possible, And so what I have started to do, and that's also, I think, what's so helpful with EO being an entrepreneurs organization or any kind of professional group where you have this trusted board of advisors or peer-to-peer mastermind, something like that, where, and for us, we're on WhatsApp together. So I will now get excited, vet an idea to my crew that's not actually my employees in my team. Yeah. And then think it through a little bit, because I have wasted an extraordinary amount of time and money with half-cooked ideas that I was excited about and didn't actually follow through on, but then felt like I had to because my team started to spend time on it. So I don't know if that's relatable at all, but it was definitely something that is a practice for me because it is so hard.
Yeah, 100%. We're actually investigating an AI tool that I just think is a magical thing. When I think about what is the capabilities of it, I'm like, this is magical. And so my husband, who's a data and AI guy and a finance guy, he said, well, here's what the ROI looks like to me, the investment versus the ROI. And he said, some of it is cost savings and some of it is revenue building. And so you need this much kind of revenue building. And so I, held myself back and went back to the team and said, okay, if we did something like this, how much time do you think it would save? And it's probably not quite there as to the ROI, but I really, 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 really want to do it. Right?
What is it?
But it's not the right thing to do. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, the idea is it's a kind of a client knowledge base. So as I mentioned, we have these long-term relationships with clients that is a general counsel. So over the years, we've talked about different kinds of projects, different things they're doing. We have all of the projects that we've done, the time tracking against all those projects. So if we could put all that in one place and have the ability to say, hey, have we ever talked to a client about data privacy? Or have we ever did we get a signed copy of this document? Or when did we do this project for them? All of that would be like this, instead of going through our document management system and, emails after emails after emails around the same topic. And, So I think that there's definitely room for it, but we've put other systems in place that have probably, diminished some of that searching that was happening a few years ago. So I think we might still do it, but maybe not going to do it right now. But it's such a cool idea. The idea to magically have that information just in front of you by just asking a question would be so cool.
Sounds amazing. And even just seeing, what might be an interesting practice is having your whole team just do a time awareness log for a couple of weeks. And you probably already did this, but seeing how, and if for anybody who's listening, who's looking at implementing something new, or if it would be worth the time analysis, is actually get data and document how you're spending your time or your team to know how much time something is actually eating up. Because what I have found, and you probably found this too, is like the things that we complain about don't actually take that much time. We just don't like doing them. And then other things we don't recognize are like, holy shit, like this is 20 hours a week. Like this is a part-time position. What are we doing? So I always like recommend going off data versus like an instinct, because often that can be wrong, but it sounds really cool and sexy. But doing that first can definitely put at least a little meat and potatoes behind pulling the trigger, especially when money's involved, and you're going to have to do a spend. And one thing too that I've done with our company, because we can get excited, and I've got a younger team. So if like a new technology or platform comes out, it's like, oh, this is really exciting. We should use it. And before you know it, you've got 18,000 subscriptions to stuff. Is like saying, okay, wait a minute, what are our 3 strategic goals for this quarter? Is it going to help us toward that and allow us to stay focused, or is it a parking lot thing to revisit later? So, I found that helpful, number one, for myself, who's always all over the freaking place, but for my team as well, to make them know that like you're heard, you're validated, but we just need to focus on something else right now. So that's helped me too, and in some conversation as well. So it doesn't feel like an immediate no. And then also we don't want to forget it per se. If it is a good idea, it's just not, you don't want it to be a distraction, right?
Well, I think that those goals and kind of strategic priorities also gives the team the ability to raise their hand and say, hey, wait a minute, is this aligned with where we're supposed to be going this quarter? Yeah. So when the shiny objects show up and we're talking about something, instead of them jumping into it, it gives them a framework to be able to say, wait a minute, here's what we were doing this quarter. We've already got these initiatives in place. Are we adding this? Are we replacing something else? Or can we do this in the future? And so that, I think giving them that freedom also helps open the conversation to the things that otherwise they might feel like they just need to jump on and start doing.
That's a great point. And it's good for accountability, right? And I give my team full out permission to call me out, to hold me accountable, to ask, like, because again, like I learned, a couple of times they were holding back and not saying something. And it's like, no, if I'm headed in the wrong direction here, like, please tell me, or, rein me back in, or whatever, and then it kind of gives them that sense of empowerment to like fully own their position too. Like they are the owners of that, the leader in that position and the role that they're playing. And in EOS, actually, there's a whole accountability chart that you can use for your team, which is really cool too. So everybody knows who's doing what, which helps from a clarity perspective too. Have you used that and implemented it, Michelle? Has it helped your team?
Yeah. So I think that's the piece that we really missed the first time around, is it got the direction that we had, and maybe even just where we were as a company. We just really couldn't get our arms around the accountability chart. And so we backburnered that and implemented some of the other tools. And this time around, our integrator was really clear that that is the core. That is the core of the system. And if you want the system to work, you have to have that first. It's different from an org chart in that it's about what are you accountable for? What is each seat accountable for? So you fire everybody when you go to start. Nobody has any jobs. We build the system of what needs to be done in this company. And then we put the people into it based on whether they get it, want it, and have the capacity to do it. That's, again, another tool in EOS. So the accountability chart was one of the hardest things, I think, for us, certainly at the time. And now that we're a little more maybe mature, it was a little easier, but it's still a challenge, but it does create that framework for, okay, who do I go to ask about this? Who's accountable for this? Because that accountability is going to drive where I go with the question, rather than just always going to my COO person and being like, hey, can you answer this? Hey, can you answer this? Because that's not her job.
Right. So, you don't want to just be wasting time on it and feeling frustrated about it either. So, but yeah, we just went through this whole thing all over again as well with our team. As we grow, it's like every new person we add, it's like, all right, let's revamp, and especially again, when you're small, you kind of have to. And so we're constantly reassessing this. And sometimes I almost feel like, banging my head against the wall, but it's good stuff. It's good conversation, because the last thing you want to do is stay doing what you've done and recognize that you have overlap or redundancies, or again, wasting time, which is like our biggest asset. So, So thank you for you shared, Michelle. Super helpful. I love it. Is there anything that you want to share or leave as a last thought for everyone listening?
You started the podcast with sort of the idea of the juggle as a parent and kind of mentioned it kind of a little bit in the middle. And so maybe I'll just touch on that before we wrap. I kind of moved to Seattle after grad school, took a job with this law firm that went away, worked in a Fortune 500 company for a few years, which I had an amazing woman that I worked for and learned so much. And then there was just sort of this time where it made sense based on kind of a merger and other things happening in that company to kind of kick this thing off. And it was modeled after the clinical experience I had in law school around small businesses. And so I had the vision, which has since morphed, but and I had a 1-year-old at home. And I think like most of us, we start this as a, hey, let's just see if it works. Let's see if there's some legs on this, right? And that's kind of what I did. Learned as much as I could, got out there, shook some hands, kissed some babies type environment. And it started to take hold. And I think the thing that I'm most maybe proud of in the juggle kind of environment is that once the kids started school, I kind of made the commitment that I would pick them up after school every day and take them where they needed to go and eat dinner. And if that meant that I had to work 3 hours or 4 hours at night, that's what it meant. And I think keeping that kind of commitment all the way through and being there through their activities, through those car rides, all those, for the folks who have kids, you kind of know that you get a lot from those car rides. Like that's kind of a place, especially as they become teenagers, where they're in their rooms much of the time. I really feel that was something that I did that was a great boundary kind of exercise. And just, I knew from the time that I left the office to the time I got to the school was, 12 and a half minutes on average. And so I had to be there by 3:15. And if I left by 3:03, I could be there before they called me and asked if I was coming. So, but again, I think we all have to figure out what those priorities and boundaries are as kind of parents trying to do this, and figure out what works for you and kind of hold tight to it. Because there are a lot of days where if I could have just punted and said somebody else go get them, I have work to do, I would have done that. So by not having that backfill, I think it really worked for me, and being able to kind of be there and build those relationships.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I'm super glad that you did, because it is hard, I think, sometimes to not get overwhelmed by this mom guilt thing that I hear from everyone. But then also the ability to choose what you want to be your boundaries that you can be disciplined to stick to, and then just be present in those moments, because they are so valuable. And if you're present in those moments, it's better than just being around, but not present for longer periods of time as well. And there's so many studies that, I have read articles about where kids who grow up watching their moms work or own a business have better relationships with their moms, and their ability or success is statistically higher too. And it's been in a couple of different places. Of course, I can't cite the exact articles now, but to validate exactly what you just said. But then for anybody else who might be struggling with it, I do, Michelle, hear it so often from friends, that are they're doing it, but they're feeling a little guilt. So
Yeah, maybe we'll always have that because of the way that, we're raised, and it's still all out there as to what the expectations are of women out there to kind of manage it all. But for me, it was, finding those things I could pick and choose and control, and that helped.
Good. Well, thank you. So valuable. So we will have access as well to all of Michelle's links, information, how to get in touch with her, check out her law firm in the show notes. And so any questions, please let us know. Always engage. And until next time, my powerhouses, continue to be courageous.